The Hurricanes get blown away. This is NHL Wraparound Stanley Cupdate for Friday, May 23rd, 2025. Vic and Neil bringing you into the weekend. If anybody needs any proof that the Florida Panthers had no intention of giving up their title, Thursday night in Game 2 against Carolina was Exhibit A.
Well, Exhibit A, B, or C. I mean, just completely dominant. Didn't allow Carolina to play the game that they've played all season long. Completely took that game away from them. Held them to 17 shots in total. I mean, Carolina usually gets 17 shots in the warm-up on the other team. And, you know, this was just a clinic. And every bit as bad a beatdown as those 6-1 games in Toronto.
Before we go into the game itself, unless the Panthers have somewhat of a downer like they had in Game 6 against the Maple Leafs, I have a hard time seeing this series returning to Raleigh next week.
Oh, certainly based on the first two games, yeah. There's going to have to be a big change in the Hurricanes to imagine that they could win a game, or there's going to have to be just a real bad night by Florida coming up, like maybe resting on their laurels, taking it too easy, the Reinhardt factor. Bobrovsky finally has a bad game. But we said yesterday, Carolina must win tonight. They must win.
Mm-hmm.
And they lost 5-0. So that about says it all.
It does. And I think the only way this becomes a series again is Carolina's level certainly has to come up, but it also has to be coupled with Florida's coming down a notch. This team smells blood right now because that was a clinic Thursday.
It absolutely was. Well, let's get into it. And then if you missed a game, you didn't see it, you're going to know it now.
Absolutely. So let's do the personnel pieces first. Jalen Chatfield on defense for Carolina missed his third straight game. We promised you this yesterday. Scott Morrow stayed in the lineup and wasn't even for the night. So really no factor either way in this one. Jesperi Kotkaniemi was scratched in favor of Mark Jankowski. Jankowski, when he was injured, was originally replaced by Jack Roslovic, who stayed in the lineup. And I think that there was a lot of hope for Carolina, and that went away about 77 seconds into the game when Gustav Forsling played a part in forcing an Andrei Svechnikov turnover. He became the 18th different Panther to score during the playoffs. 1-0 Cats, and they're off and running.
And again, Svechnikov, who's having a horrible time with the Panthers, and you'll hear more about that as we go on. A soft backhand pass, picked off, get it to Forsling, and they score. Brind'Amour must have been irate with his number 37 because that was just a bad, weak backhand pass in his own zone.
As you said, we'll have more on Svechnikov and his maladies in the first period in a second, but just to put some scope on that stat, 18th Panther to score during the playoffs, 13th by defenseman. In last year's Cup run, 15 different Panthers scored, and 12 of those goals came by defensemen. So these numbers are enhanced from a year ago, and we are only 2 games into the conference final.
Yeah, we're only barely a hair over halfway to the Stanley Cup.
Logan Stankoven had a slot attempt chance in the first half of the first period. That was pretty much all there was for Carolina in the first because Matthew Tkachuk taps in a Carter Verhaeghe. I'm not going to call it a wraparound because he kind of stepped out in front, but he went across crease. That second line makes it 2-0.
You know, there was a really good hit by Martinook on Mikkola, like just ran him, like a big-time hit. So Carolina was heavily involved and physically there in this game. Slavin had a really good shot at the 4-minute mark that was a great save by Bobrovsky. I mean, every time Bobrovsky comes up with a big save on a good opportunity, it takes another bit of air out of the building. right? Because it's like, oh, they scored, and now we got a great chance. Oh, we couldn't score.
By the way, what was the origination point on that second goal? Sam Bennett forcing a turnover by Andrei Svechnikov. So 2 turnovers, 2 pucks in your net.
Yeah, and that was at 11:41 when Svechnikov coughed that one up. And maybe that's it. I didn't think of that. Svechnikov it up. That's his name. Svechnikov it up.
Svechnikov, yes.
Svechnikov it up.
Coughed it up. Yes. Well, I'm not done with him yet because at the 14:07 mark, Svechnikov, roughing penalty on Matthew Tkachuk. It's the first power play attempt of the evening for the Florida Panthers. Bobrovsky makes a save on Martinook, shorthanded, and then on the ensuing rush, Carter Verhaeghe's shot is tipped in by Sam Bennett. 3-0, 3 goals, 5 shots. Disastrous period for Svechnikov. Turnovers resulting in the first 2 goals in the penalty box for the third goal.
And it's even worse because the penalty that he took on Tkachuk was exactly what the Florida Panthers wanted. There was a cross-check by Tkachuk, just a slight, like one of those aggravating things from behind. Svechnikov chases him to his bench, and before he can get on the bench, punches him in the back of the head.
Yeah.
You're never going to get away with that, ever. And then he's called on that roughing penalty, which is exactly what the Panthers want. It's exhibit A of what they want. That's why they have Sam Bennett, Tkachuk, and Marchand. Guys that go in there and get under your skin and try to get you to take bad penalties. And Svechnikov should have known this, or I'm sure he did know it, but he couldn't keep his impulses down.
Later on in the first period, because this is not all good for the Florida Panthers, Sam Reinhart was hit by Sebastian Aho. I thought it was a blind hit. And honestly, I know we try to keep it clean here. I think this was a shitty hit that Aho delivered because Reinhart had gotten rid of the puck and he backed into him. And even though we're into this lower body, upper body thing again, it was his left leg that was clearly affected by that hit. He didn't return to the game. And Aho has some great offensive gifts. And I like what he brings to the team in an offensively creative mode. But he's also one of these guys that'll hit you and then give you the what, who, me look.
No, he is.
Players retaliate.
Yeah, but that's what Florida Panthers do all night long. So, at least they got one guy on Carolina that will give them back a little bit of their own medicine. I mean, that's the same as Kucherov, right? Nikita Kucherov is the same way. Yeah. He's an unbelievable talent, but he'll also give it to you from time to time in a dirty way. And Sebastian Aho takes no crap from anybody and sometimes does some little sneaky, dirty things. And
so what'd you think of the hit then?
I thought it was a dirty hit, but, he got away with it. And I mean, it's going on all night long. There's punches to the head and things that you see that don't get called.
And then he pokes Mikkola. It's like, you're going to fight Mikkola? I mean, he's going to pop him like a zit.
I don't know. I don't know about that. You know what? I don't like that Reinhart got hurt, if he's hurt, because I love his talent. Somebody on Carolina's got to stand up to these guys and give them back some of their own medicine.
I thought there was a better way to do that than that sort of hit. But there was karma because early in the second period, Aho apparently had a goal at the 52nd mark. However, play was deemed offside because it was ruled that Burns had actually propelled the puck back into the Florida zone and not Matthew Tkachuk. So that goal was waved off and the score stayed 3-0.
Paul Maurice did a real good job of identifying that, or him and his staff. They took their time out. They made sure, and sure enough, when Burnsy went to poke check Matthew Tkachuk, he actually got under the stick and touched the puck as well. So that made that offside.
I thought second period was rather low event. I mean, there were some spotty opportunities for both sides. Not much offense, not much going on at all. But Sam Bennett scores his second of the game, 9th of the playoffs, to move into a tie with Mikko Rantanen for the playoff lead. This came off a wraparound by Carter Verhaeghe with 39 seconds left in the period. That second line, and remember how we had made mention, wasn't a lot of production during that second round series against Toronto. They combined for 3 goals, 5 assists, 8 points, and a +9. And shots on goal by the end of the second period, 16-7. Favor of the Panthers. Shot attempts 42-27. Those are clearly typical of numbers that the Hurricanes put up. So basically, they're getting their own lunch fed to them.
And that's what I said at the beginning of the show. They played Carolina hockey better than Carolina. I mean, they just took their game away and gave it to them the same way as they give it to everybody else. You look at those shot attempts of 42-27 by Florida. And, you know, usually as we joke and say, Carolina's got shots from before they've even gotten out of their cars going into the game. So it's so impressive what Florida did in game 2, which was even better than what they did in game 1.
Start of the third period, Pyotr Kochetkov came in to replace Freddie Anderson, probably give him a little bit of a breather. Rod Brindamore realizing that at 4-0, they're not coming back to win this game. So why waste your number one to play a useless third period? And at that point, Aho was a marked man. Matthew Tkachuk was giving him lip pretty much from the time that he took Sam Reinhart out. And Nico Mikkola had a hit on Seth Jarvis, who left but also returned, but he looked a little bit wobbly. And remember back 3 years ago, second round, game 7 against the Rangers, Jacob Trouba hit him. So this is not the first time that he has been knocked loopy during the course of a playoff series.
Don't want to get on the Rangers, but that's one thing that Trouba could do for the Rangers when he was there. You had to keep your head up with Trouba, and you're right, that this is the second time that we've seen in the playoffs Jarvis get nailed.
Be interested to see what kind of update there is, if any, coming out of Carolina during the course on Friday. For the Hurricanes, it took them until the 6:18 mark of the third period to reach double digits in shots. So, on top of everything else, it's so difficult to get through the Panthers when they are collectively defending the way they did.
As we said, they played a great game, both ends of the ice, and then you've got to get it past Bobrovsky. So it was a tall task. I don't know what can, Vic, but something drastic has to change in game 3.
Well, why don't we start with the Carolina penalty killing? Because the last goal of the game, Alex Barkov tips in an Aaron Ekblad shot with 6:11 left. Panthers 2 for 2 on the night and 4 for 5 against a penalty killing unit that has been atop the NHL the entire season.
Yep, just another little nail in the coffin.
Sergei Bobrovsky, 17 saves, 6 career playoff shutout, third in the 2025 playoffs. And we had noted that, look, if your team doesn't score, it doesn't matter what Freddie Anderson did, as long as he gave up 1 goal, which, of course, he wound up giving up 4. But that's another level that, as we have gotten deeper into the playoffs, you get into this series, you need your goaltender to play equal to Bobrovsky, if not better. And that is just not happening.
It isn't happening. And if we're being honest, we didn't think it would happen, right?
Correct.
We said that could be their Achilles heel, but it isn't their Achilles heel. Their whole game is their Achilles heel, Carolina. Yeah. They're not able to play with Florida in these playoffs. The game that they play doesn't match up well with the way Florida plays.
14 consecutive conference final losses for the Hurricanes and counting. Game 3, Saturday, 8 o'clock Eastern on TNT. On Friday, game number 2, Edmonton and Dallas. The Stars lead 1-0 by virtue of a 5-goal third period and a 6-3 opening game win. Matthias Ekholm will remain out for game 2 for the Oilers. What I'll be looking for here is what lessons the Oilers have learned from their game 1 third period collapse.
And we shall see how these teams come out. What I'm interested to see is the opposite, is what did Dallas learn about their slow start at home? I mean, they're the home team. They came out very slow out of the gate. Edmonton took the energy out of the building. And yes, they got it back in, but not till the third period. They can't win game two. They're not going to win any more playoff games the way they won game one.
Correct. By virtue of Edmonton taking 3 consecutive penalties and 3-1 lead entering the third period, disappearing into a 4-3 deficit because you couldn't stay out of the penalty box.
I'm sure that Evander Kane and Corey Perry have been talked to and talked into the mirror as well and said, we can't do this. They can't be Shvetnikov West.
Yes.
Meaning taking foolish penalties and putting their team at risk. And I'm sure that will change.
Well, Leon Draisaitl kind of put it out there after game one also.
Yes, he did. He sure did.
That second game will be on ESPN at 8 o'clock Eastern. And some news from around the NHL. Remember, on Thursday, we said that the New York Islanders had been granted permission to speak with club president of the Maple Leafs, Brendan Shanahan. And it turns out that later in the day, Shanahan found out that his contract will not be renewed by the Maple Leafs after 11 seasons at the helm there. By the way, Neil, I have a call into Keith Pelly afterwards. I'm putting in a plug for you to assume that position. So it'll be really a choice between being Leafs Club president or doing this podcast. So I don't want to put any pressure on you.
We'll see who they decide to put in that job, if anybody. Maybe somebody from MLSE will decide that they want to run it and just leave Brad Treliving to run the hockey side alone.
I was going to ask you that question. Does that position need to be filled? And if it is filled by a hockey person, what type of executive goes in there and has the necessary impact to perhaps turn the fortunes around to the Maple Leafs, which now goes back to 1967, 58 years ago, since the last cup?
I would be surprised if they brought a hockey person in to be president again, because the president role is a business position. It's not a hockey position. And from what I understand, Brendan did stay away from hockey decisions during the Lamoriello time, during the Dubas time. Treliving's only been there 2 years, but I think he pretty much let Brad, run the hockey decisions, and Shanahan basically did everything else. And there were some really good articles written about Brendan Shanahan yesterday and all the stuff that he did for the Maple Leafs. And he did an amazing job of bringing the Leafs to the level they're at. But you and I said this last year, and you can go back and find this, that if the Leafs didn't have playoff success, Brendan Shanahan would get fired. Mm-hmm. I said that. Last year, it was Sheldon Keefe, who lost in overtime, Game 7 to Boston as the coach. He gets fired. Why is it his fault? Brendan Shanahan, I said, if there was no playoff success, he would not survive it. That's Toronto. And next year, if they don't have success, Treliving, it'll probably be his turn, because he'll have been 3 years. And God, we got to chop somebody's head off. You know what? It just never ends there until they take the tact that, God help me for saying this, that the Rangers took. Everybody was mad at Drury for this season, right? Rightfully so. Yeah. Rightfully so. Right. They should be. He self-imploded the franchise. But ownership in New York said, no, he's getting a new deal. He's getting an extension. He's our guy. And then everything went away about Chris Drury. Nobody talks about Chris Drury anymore because it was decided on. So now MLSE, everybody's griping about Brendan Shanahan plan. Remember the Shanahan plan? Yeah. And the MLSE could have said, well, we're giving Brendan Shanahan a new contract. We think he's done a real good job. It's not his fault that the highly paid players didn't come through. Mm-hmm. And you know what would have happened? Everybody would have stopped talking about Shanahan and they would have started talking about something else because that decision's been made. And now where are they? They fire Shanahan, leave that whole thing in a blank space where you don't know what's going on. And now everything that will be talked about in Toronto until they do something to show what their plan is will be about, well, who's replacing Shanahan? What's going to happen? Blah, blah, blah. I guess that's what they like.
There goes that oxygen meter again.
Yeah.
Spending too much air on the Maple Leafs.
Yep. Well, it's my hometown.
Well, yes. But nonetheless, we're going to move to another team because you had broken the news yesterday, at least in real time on the podcast, that Jeff Blashill become the new head coach of the Chicago Blackhawks, replacing Anders Sorensen, who I believe is going to stay within the organization, either as an assistant or maybe have a role with AHL Rockford again. But he now has a new assistant, meaning Blashill, and that's Michael Pekka, who left a similar position as an assistant with the Rangers to join Blashill.
And Michael Pekka had not been fired with the outgoing Peter Laviolette. Phil Housley was let go with Peter Laviolette. But Michael Pekka probably had a meeting with Mike Sullivan and said, look, I know Jeff Blashill. We're friends, or if they are, they must be. And if you don't have a big role for me here, then I'll just go to Chicago. And I bet you that's what happened. And that's good for Sullivan because then he's got an opening to put somebody else in there that he wants.
More original Six news. The Bruins are expected to make a decision on their next head coach next week. Number of candidates, including Joe Sacco, who had the interim role this year after taking over for Jim Montgomery. So Boston, Pittsburgh, and Seattle, the three head coaching vacancies still out there.
And you know what? Jim Hiller was interim last year with LA Kings, and they decided to keep him and make him the permanent head coach. During the regular season, that worked out real well for them, I think. And who knows? Maybe it'll be Joe Sacco that will end up being the permanent coach. I don't see any reason why it shouldn't be, unless they think there's somebody out there that could do a better job with the personnel that they have.
We started with all the good news with the Florida Panthers going up 2-0 in their Eastern Conference final, but
this day in Stanley Cup history.
Everything has to have a foundation, and in 2022, the Tampa Bay Lightning swept the President's Trophy winning Florida Panthers 2-0 to punch their ticket to the Eastern Conference Final. Andre Vasilevsky made 49 saves in that game, and the Lightning won their 10th consecutive playoff series. At that time, they did make it to 11 before losing in the final that year to Colorado. But by hitting double digits with consecutive series wins, they joined the Islanders and Canadiens as the only other teams to win 10 or more consecutive series in the postseason. But we actually saw this with the New York Islanders before we promote Doormat to Dynasty for Saturday, that this was part of the growing pain for the Florida Panthers, who win the President's Trophy, get swept, which took a lot of people by surprise. But then the Panthers make the final in 23 before losing to the Golden Knights, win the Stanley Cup last year, and now 6 games away from repeating this year.
And let's go through 22 again, just to remind everybody what that year was like. They started the season, the Florida Panthers did, with Joel Kenville as their head coach, Andrew Brunette as one of the assistant coaches. Yeah. They started the season very, very well. However, because of something that happened in Chicago a few years earlier, Joel Kenville was forced to resign from the Florida Panthers, and the Florida Panthers decided to make Andrew Brunette the head coach. He continued to lead the Florida Panthers to the President's Trophy. However, as you said, they got swept by their cross-state rival, the Tampa Bay Lightning, which prompted the Florida Panthers to look for a new head coach. Surprisingly, because a lot of people thought that Andrew Burnett had done a real good job in Florida, the Panthers reached out and ended up nabbing Paul Maurice as their head coach, much to the chagrin of some media people who said that he's going to bring his boring style of Winnipeg hockey now to Florida. They were all wrong.
Yep.
And he had a real good first year in the playoffs, that is, in knocking out the Bruins after being down. Yep. Went on, as you said, to lose to the Golden Knights in the finals, which taught them a lot. And then they came back last year with a spectacular season and ended up winning the cup. And this year are, as you said, 6 games away from repeating that. So that's where the fortunes of the Florida Panthers have gone from the start of the 21-22 season.
And we don't want to get too far downwind because, as we said, still a long way to go this year and potentially setting themselves up to get the dynasty label if they win the cup this year in the 25-26 season. Speaking of dynasties, you and I are proud to be dropping on Saturday, May 24th, 45th anniversary of the New York Islanders' first Stanley Cup championship, doormat to dynasty. Neil and I had the pleasure of speaking with Dennis Potvin, John Tonelli, and Ken Morrow. And this special runs about 2 hours, but the best part about these things is there are benchmark dates and games and series that we talk about. And there are also parts of this where the three of them just reminisce and we just let them go.
Oh, no, it's a lot of fun. Even if you're not an Islander fan, it's just great to listen to the stories from these guys from those years. Don't forget, Ken Morrow had won a real gold medal that year in the Olympics at Lake Placid, and I say a real gold medal because he was an amateur. The team was an amateur team. They were all college players who ended up beating the fantastic Russian team and then had to beat Finland to actually win the gold medal. Then he joins the Islanders and is with them for that cup in 1980. And, of course, Ken stays on to win 3 more after that, as did Tonelli and Denny Potvin. It's a fun show, and I think you'll really enjoy it.
16 players were there for all 4 Stanley Cups. You'll never see that again. You'll never see 19 consecutive playoff series win. No disrespect to the Panthers or any other team that is coming after them that may have a run like this. It's just a remarkable run, and as Neil said, hope that you will enjoy it, and that will drop sometime on Saturday, as will our next edition of Stanley Cupdate. Don't forget to subscribe and like us, and we will be back tomorrow to recap Game 2 of Oilers and Stars and preview Game 3, Panthers and Hurricanes. Take care.